Congrats on embarking on the first chapter of the rest of your life. University is such a fun and exciting time. So as you and your parents pack up the car and prepare to head off to university this autumn, there are a few things to know that aren't common knowledge, but might come in handy.
As you take your first steps into adulthood, it's hard to know what you don't know.
And as much as university is about having fun and making memories, it's also about finding your feet, making well-informed decisions, and figuring out who you are as an adult.
So here are 10 things every parent and student should know before heading off to university here in the UK. Number 1, duty of care. We of course hope everything goes smoothly, but sometimes things can go wrong, and that can be kind of hard to plan for.
Contrary to popular belief, universities have no legal duty of care to their students, which means universities don't actually have any legal obligations to take care of you.
This is currently a debate being fought in the courts and in Parliament, so the jury's still out on this one. And even though you've just come out of school, and university feels a lot like school in a lot of ways, they revoke this responsibility as you're legally an adult.
It sounds crazy, I know, but it's something that's really important to be aware of. So if something goes wrong at university and you need help, it's really important to know your university's policies and procedures. That way, if you need to report an issue or make a complaint, you know the process to do so.
But there's another catch. Because universities are independent businesses, they write their own policy and procedures. This means they aren't really laws, they're more suggestions.
So while it's important to be familiar with your university's policies and procedures, it's also important to know your rights as a student, which you can learn more about in our other video.
If you do have an issue arise or decide to bring a complaint forward to your university, I recommend bringing a friend, a law student, or a student union representative with you to act as a witness or advocate. It's also important to take diligent records of every meeting with the university and have an independent person of support in the room with you to fight for you.
And if your university breaks their own rules in the complaints process, you can report them to the OIA, the Office of Independent Adjudicators, who will then review the university's process.
If the uni or their policies are deemed to be insufficient or negligent, you may be awarded compensation.
When things go wrong or an unexpected issue pops up, a student's natural reaction a lot of the time is to reach out to their university for help, thinking that they have their best interests at heart.
But when only 12% of students feel their university has handled their mental health issues well, it's important to know why universities act the way they act and how to really get help from your university if you need it.
Which brings us to point number 2, a point which is especially important for international students, which is that UK universities have less legal requirements than most other countries.
Because they're considered independent businesses, UK universities have minimal government oversight.
To put this in perspective, the Minister of Higher Education has quite literally put more regulations on bouncy castles than he has on higher education.
What this means is that university students in the UK have less legal protections than any other group of people, because you're not legally protected like you are as a child in school or like you would be as an employee in the workplace.
So again, it's important that all students know their rights and what they're entitled to as a student, and it's especially important to keep this in mind when considering coming to the UK as an international student.
36% of international students report poor mental health, and they're also more likely to be the target of sexual violence and experience greater symptoms of PTSD.
But since the government has yet to put adequate legal protections in place to regulate how universities treat students, it's up to your university to have sufficient support available for whatever issues you may come up against.
Relating to the lack of government regulations, staff and students in UK universities are not legally required to undergo number 3, criminal background checks.
You're thinking, how can that be? Well, it's because as a university-age student, you're legally an adult, so universities are not necessarily required to offer any extra protections. That doesn't mean some don't, it just means that not all of them do.
UCAS, that website where you apply for university, they only recently lifted the disclosure of criminal convictions for students. The University of Edinburgh knowingly admitted a student who had been kicked out of another university while under police investigation for rape.
The University of Sussex kept a professor on payroll after he'd spent time in prison for serious assault and battery of a student, who he was dating at the time.
Which brings us to number 4. Only 8 universities have banned student-staff relationships.
When investigating a ban on staff-student relationships, one staff member said, "You can't deny us one of the perks of the job."
Yikes.
Staff on student sexual harassment and abuse is so prevalent that Universities UK produced the Changing the Culture report. In this report, they found that students who experience staff on student abuse oftentimes end up dropping out, or at the very least, the abuse has a detrimental impact on their mental health.
You may be thinking staff-student relationships is different from staff and student abuse, but actually, the issue of abuse stems from an imbalance of power, which, when talking about the dynamic between staff and students, is always relevant.
According to the Degrees of Abuse report by Al Jazeera, there are several predators currently teaching in higher education who take advantage of this lack of policy and leverage their position of power to sexually harass and assault students.
With such an ingrained imbalance of power, universities can be a breeding ground for grooming and abuse.
A National Union of Students 2018 study found that 80% of students feel uncomfortable with staff-student relationships, while only 5% of tutors thought they were inappropriate.
The thing is, you go to university to learn, not to deal with sexual advances made by a staff member.
So, while it shouldn't be your responsibility, if a tutor asks you to talk about your essay over an innocent drink at the pub, just say no, because these are the kinds of cases that result in NDAs.
NDA stands for non-disclosure agreement. NDAs are typically used in employment law to protect sensitive and confidential information from being shared outside the company.
Just this year, ministers and campaigners banned the use of NDAs in cases of sexual misconduct, harassment and bullying. Yay! So, why are we still talking about it?
Because it's important to be aware of confidentiality clauses, which are the same thing, just called something different.
If you've made a complaint and the university tells you not to talk about the complaint, you absolutely should seek advice from an outside source.
Confidentiality is something that really benefits them, and they could use it against you. No matter what you do not sign anything from the university that restricts you from seeking legal advice.
As a student, we want to believe that the university has our best interests at heart, but it can also be intimidating sitting in a room full of suits with a legal document shoved in your face. And as a student making a complaint to the university, you are in a vulnerable position.
A university official's primary prerogative is to protect the university's reputation from anything that could potentially be negative press.
And a lot of negative press comes from sexual violence on campus.
While at university, 62% of students experience some form of sexual violence. Obviously, that's a huge issue that many young people are subjected to that has a major impact on your time at university and your life.
It's such a big topic, and that's why we made a whole other video about it.
But here's the kicker. Over 50% of assaults happen within the first 3 months of university. This is known as the red zone.
So God forbid something happens to you, visit us at changecampusculture.com, where we have a resource map for all survivors of sexual assault, which includes initial steps, local support in your area, and how your university can help support you.
We are also developing an advocacy program with volunteers to help support their peers through what can be a really difficult time. So if you're interested in volunteering with us, join our mailing list.
Right, on to number 7, the cost of living crisis. We're living in a time where so many have been negatively affected by the cost of living crisis, and students are no exception. 84% of students say they worry about money constantly, and the average student is £277 short every month.
Barely considering the impact of inflation, the government has only approved a maintenance loan increase of 2.3%, which is £1,500 short of what's needed. And this isn't just affecting students from disadvantaged backgrounds.
The government hasn't reviewed the parental earnings threshold since 2008, which is capped at £25,000, meaning less students are able to access the maximum level of financial support. A BBC investigation revealed that the number of students asking for emergency cash has more than tripled since 2018.
So if you're struggling financially, ask your university about the Student Hardship Fund. The Student Hardship Fund is a £261 million grant that's been distributed to universities by the Office for Students, and it offers financial support of up to £2,500 per year that does not need to be paid back.
The average student that applied for the fund in 2021 received £826, so while it's still not enough, every little bit helps.
International students can apply for the International Hardship Fund and receive up to £1,000 in financial aid.
But students are struggling with more than financial issues, with 57% of students reporting mental health issues. What's even more worrying is that 1 in 5 students seriously consider suicide.
While we've come a long way, we still have a long way to go towards breaking the stigma surrounding mental health. It's important we come together as parents, friends, teachers, as a community to offer support to those struggling, and your university is no exception.
With only 12% of those who reached out to their university feeling their mental health was dealt with adequately, it's important we continue to demand support services from our universities.
What's most important is getting you the help you need, whether that's through the NHS, therapy, or local support groups.
And if you find a therapist you feel connected with or who specialises in your area of need, you can approach your university for financial aid. Finances should never be a barrier to getting mental health support.
There's also a lot of fantastic mental health and well-being apps out there that either offer a student discount or are totally free to students. Headspace is a personal favorite, but there's also Calm, Aura Health, MoodFit, Sanvelo, Happify, and the Shine app. Mindbox offers 24-hour instant access therapy to students free with a Totem student card.
There's an app out there for whatever you're struggling with, like the Rise Up and Recover app for those struggling specifically with eating disorders. There are also great independent resources specifically for student issues such as Student Space from Student Minds.
If you or your child has struggled with mental health issues prior to university, I highly recommend you download the app Not OK, which is a free digital panic button. It notifies your trusted contacts when you're not okay to get you immediate support via text, phone call, or GPS location when you're struggling to reach out.
But let's talk about the fun stuff, university life. And for a lot of you, that includes number 9, alcohol. In fact, at least 80% of you think drinking or getting drunk is a big part of university culture, especially during Freshers' Week.
The UK government currently recommends 14 units of alcohol per week, but just to be clear, that's the number they believe lowers the risk of causing long-term damage to your health.
Fun fact, that number has actually changed over time. In 1979, the UK government recommended no more than 56 units a week.
So it's really important to know your limits. And if you've not had much experience with alcohol prior to uni, DrinkAware offers a great Freshers' Week survival guide that includes a drinking calculator to give you a sense of how much is good, how much is not so good, and how much is definitely too much.
We know that any amount of regular alcohol use causes harm to your health. And as well as having an impact on your physical health, alcohol also has an effect on your mental health. Alcohol is a depressant and alters the delicate balance of chemicals in your brain, and we know that consistent heavy alcohol intake directly relates to depression and anxiety.
So if you're struggling with your mental health, it may be best to lay off the drink for a while. In fact, sobriety is becoming increasingly popular, with one study reporting that 20% of Gen Z university-age students don't drink at all. This generation is really turning that stereotype on its head.
Gen Zs are actually less likely to drink than any other age group, and a lot of universities have caught on to this and are offering sober freshers events. However, that same study found that when Gen Zs do drink, they're more likely to binge.
So remember, it's on you to drink responsibly and act responsibly. Drinking is not an excuse for aggressive or abusive behaviour. It's important to hold your peers accountable, to be an active bystander when you see something that's not right, and to always keep an eye on your friends.
And speaking of drinks, we gotta talk about drugs.
A little over half of UK university students have tried drugs. Only 15 to 20% use drugs regularly, but the majority of students think that their peers are constantly using drugs. So there's some discrepancy between how much of a role we think alcohol and drugs play in university life and the reality of how prevalent they actually are. The most common drug used is marijuana.
Marijuana is made up of 2 chemical compounds, CBD and THC. Over time, the breeding of marijuana has increased the THC chemical, which is the part that gets you high, so it's not really the same peace and love drug that it was for the hippies.
THC affects the hippocampus and the orbital frontal cortex of the brain, which allows us to remember things and shift attentional focus. And since everyone has different brains, marijuana affects everyone differently.
For some, it can be a euphoric and relaxing experience, while for others, it can be anxiety-inducing and create severe paranoia.
Smoking is one of the most common ways to take marijuana, but edibles are becoming increasingly popular. And it's important to note that it takes longer for the chemical compound to be released from edibles, so it's easier to accidentally overdo it.
The brain is still developing through your 20s, and regular or even semi-regular drug use can be detrimental to cognitive functioning and mental health.
Studies have shown that uni students who frequently use drugs have lower grades, skip classes more often, and take longer to graduate. So it's probably not the best idea to use marijuana regularly in an educational setting if you're hoping to pass your course. As a uni student, most of your time will probably be spent hanging out and socializing in the city where you go to university. But just remember, never ever drive under the influence of drugs or alcohol.
This information is in no way supposed to encourage drug use, but it's important we give university students all the information so that they can make the best informed decision.
Remember, don't do anything you don't want to do. While that may be easier said than done with the social pressures of university, as much as university is about making friends and having fun, it's also about finding your own agency and making your own decisions as you emerge into adulthood. Figuring out who you are as an independent, responsible adult is what the university years are all about. And that's a pretty big task. So good luck and enjoy the adventure. This video is part of Change Campus Culture's initial 3-part university campaign series. So check out our other videos, Your Rights as a Student, and What to Do if you experience sexual violence while at university, which includes more practical and informative guidance to help navigate this exciting, fun, and sometimes confusing time of life.